The Movie Book by DK Publishing. Introduction. This guide describes, discusses, and pays tribute to some of the movies that best capture the wonder of cinema. The movies gathered here are those that the authors feel, in the imprecise way of these things, to have had the most seismic impact on both cinema and the world. The journey starts in 1902 when Parisian showman Georges Méliès unveiled the latest in the series of short silent movies with which he had been entertaining his countrymen. It was a romp through space called A Trip to the Moon, Le Voyage dans la Lune, and it was a huge and instant success, not just in France, but across the world. Sadly for Méliès, much of that success was due to the movie being incessantly pirated by rivals. Its popularity did more than any other movie of the time to secure the movie as the premier art form of the age. None before it had been as spectacular, none had such an intricate storyline. No matter where the cinema goes, we cannot afford to lose sight of its beginnings. Martin Scorsese. Trains, Panic, and Hype. By the time Méliès was making his lunar adventure, cinema had already been established as a slightly disreputable pastime, to be enjoyed at theaters and fairgrounds. To find its true beginnings, it is necessary to step back further, to Paris again, but this time with two showmen in the spotlight. The pair, brothers Augustin and Louis Lumière, had their moment in 1896. That was, after holding large-scale screenings of their movies the year before, they first showed the French public L'Olivier d'un Temps in La Gare de Ciotat, also known as The Arrival of a Train. It was a mere 50 seconds of footage in which, as the title suggests, a steam train entered the Ciotat station, shot from the adjacent platform. The sight sent all those watching fleeing in panic, convinced they were about to be mowed down by the speeding locomotive. Or at least that's the story that circulated after the event. The exact truth has been lost to time, but either the Lumières had quickly mastered the new art form's ability to make the screen feel lifelike, or they had a stunning knack for promotional hype. Perhaps it doesn't matter either way. Both those skills have a central place in the story of cinema. But it may be necessary to step back further still. After all, before the Lumiere brothers sent their audiences bolting in terror, plenty of others had pioneered movies. There should be a tip of the hat to United States inventor Thomas Edison, who had screened movies of boxing cats and men sneezing to individual customers a couple of years before the Lumieres, and the English photographer Edward Muybridge, whose 1880 studies of humans and animals in motion were a vital preface to the moving picture. I don't know yet what I'm going to tell them, but it'll be pretty close to the truth. Philip Marlowe, The Big Sleep. Telling stories. In fact, the story of the movie arguably stretches back to prehistoric times. The human ancestors hunched around a fire as one among them used the light to cast shadows on the wall and illustrate tales of beasts and beasts or unlikely heroism. When the audience settled into their seats for an insanely expansive, effects-fueled blockbuster on a towering IMAX screen, they're back around that fire. Movie in the 21st century is still a telling of stories with words and images, bringing those images to a believable life. This guide is an attempt to build a narrative of movie history and of the movies themselves, taking a tour of 100 or so movies from Méliès on through the next century and beyond. Each entry discusses where a movie came from, its inspiration, how it was made, documents the men and women whose talent shaped it, and the details, the ripples of influence it sent out. It is a story that crosses time. In the Silent Age, the first men and women explored the possibilities of moving pictures. From there, the story slips into the 1930s and 40s, the gilded years when cinema stood on every main street and movies were beloved slabs of mass appeal. The age of movie stars such as Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, and James Stewart. In the 1950s, filmmakers from Europe, India, and Japan created a string of masterpieces that still receive acclaim to this day. This was the time of Henri-Georges Clouzot, Akira Kurosawa, Yasujiro Ozu, Nicholas Ray, and Satyajit Ray. A new generation took hold in the 1960s and 1970s and broke the established molds. And then the story of cinema arrives in the present, where movies are made with technology that would have been the stuff of science fiction even 10 years ago, whole worlds spun into being as a push of a button. I live now in a world of ghosts, a prisoner in my dreams. Antonius Block, The Seventh Seal. Each picture has some sort of rhythm, which only the director can give it. Fritz Lang. Blissful immersion. The beauty of movies is that every individual has a different way of looking at them and a different route into loving them. As a writer and movie journalist, this book's consultant has spent much of his adult life in cinema seeking out movies that can give him the feeling of blissful immersion he was hooked on as a child. I sit with the lights dim and I'm the 7-year-old who yelped with laughter at Harpo Marx on a rigged-up screen at a friend's birthday party, or who escaped the family Christmas at 10 to switch on the old TV set upstairs, found that Citizen Kane was playing and whose mind was comprehensively blown at 14 by the dark, unnerving movies of David Lynch. Those movies live on every time I see a film. A couple of decades after a trip to the moon with a luckless Méliès soon to find himself selling trinkets at a Montparnasse train station, the youthful medium was given a nickname that still fits today, the seventh art, after architecture, painting, music, sculpture, dance, and poetry. Its author was Ricciotto Canudo, an Italian scholar. To Canudo, the power of the movies was that they brought each of the great art forms of the past together at once, into one. To watch movies was to experience all six of the older art forms at once. Movies evolve. So many years later, the sheer sensory rush of the movies is still enough to overwhelm the audience in the very best sense of the word. It's hard to imagine the creak and crackle of cinema's early years drawing a viewer into the screen the way a movie does now. But as the Lumiere's train movie shows, movies could make audiences take them as real from the start. Charting how the movies have evolved as an art form is one of the great joys of being a movie lover. Sometimes the advances may be obvious, but momentous lurches from silence to sound and from black and white to color. Elsewhere, the revolutions were subtler, as the crafts of filmmaking, cinematography, editing took on lives of their own. The wider historical context in which movies were made also needs to be considered. When you talk about movies, you're never just talking about movies. Once you dive into the history of movies, you can't help dealing with the history and you can't help dealing with this history in general. Looking at the last century of movies, and you see real life running through it like the rings of a tree. Purely as cinema, it is hard to overstate the impact of Godzilla, the movie monster who terrorized Tokyo Bay in 1954. And what was Godzilla? But Japan's nuclear trauma meets Gaily flesh. You don't need to be a movie lover to quote a line from Some Like It Hot. Nobody's perfect, but how different a movie it would have been had Austrian-born director Billy Wilder had not been forced, like so many other European filmmakers, to flee to the U.S. as the Nazis took power. The Russian Revolution, the Cold War, the hippie era, feminism, the computer age. Every major moment in world history is up there on screen somewhere. All this in a medium that began in the fairground, one step from the circus, and has spent much of its existence as an excuse for young couples to sit together in the dark. That what was happening on the screen ascended to such glorious entertainment was unlikely enough. That it became art is perhaps even more extraordinary. If we're looking for a shark, we're not going to find him on the land. Hooper, Jaws. We can't help identifying with the protagonist. It's coded in our movie-going DNA. Roger Ebert, Chicago Sun-Times, 2012. A communal experience. In many ways, it is their contradictions that make the movies what they are. How else to explain the effect they have on their audiences? When a viewer falls for a movie, it can feel like it has been made for them and them alone, like a hand extending from the screen. And yet, if you have ever watched a really great comedy in the middle of a packed cinema, or flinched to a horror alongside 200 others doing exactly the same, you will know that movies are meant to be watched in a crowd. that cinema grew up as an experience to be shared with others. Over the years, movies have been viewed in many different ways. At first, they were novelties, cheap dollops of sensation. Then they were impossibly glamorous moments of escapism where stars glittered in pristine black and white. They evolved into profound accounts of the human condition made by great auteurs. Today, they are often vastly expensive spectacles designed to make still more money for studios and corporations. They make you feel that you slip behind the eyes of the people on screen. The whole thing not unlike a dream or an act of hypnosis until you stumble back out into the light, maybe understanding something new about yourself, maybe just aching from laughing so hard. Art, that's special. What can you bring to it that nobody else can? Mr. Turlington. Boyhood. A world of choice. Some of the movies in this guide were adored by critics, others were pure crowd pleasers. Quite a few were neither flops that later generations then realized were masterpieces. Genre doesn't come into it. Thrillers rub shoulders with westerns, romance with neorealism, and they all have to make room for the occasional musical. Language and nationality are no concern either. Hollywood is well represented, although many see it as a dirty word. The true movie lover knows how many good things Tinseltown has produced over the years. But there has always been a big world beyond Beverly Hills, and no worthwhile book about movies could ever ignore that. The White Ribbon deserves its place every bit as much as Jaws. There will, of course, be both omissions and inclusions that will puzzle each reader. Part of the beauty of cinema is that no two opinions on movies are ever quite the same. If this were just a list of the favorites of the consultant and authors, it would deviate in places from the list that follows. You might think the job of selection would get easier if the criterion were greatness, but really that's just as subjective. Rather, this guide chooses its movies as an atlas of influence, a collection of landmarks, and the hope is that if a reader's own best-loved movie is missing, there will be others that make up for it, and also that there will be at least one movie that readers will choose to watch for the first time. When you clean them up, when you make movies respectable, you kill them. Pauline Kael, Going Steady, 1969.